All right, welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as always, is David Griscom. David, hello.
Hey, man.
And joining us this evening is Nick Marcil. Is a higher education organizer with the Debt Collective. Nick, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Oh, thank you so much, Matt and David. And just glad to be here.
Well, we appreciate all the work you guys have been doing with the student loan stuff. And before we get to the courts of it all, can you just set the scene for folks? Like, what was this? Just set the scene for like the push of student loan forgiveness and up to the point where Biden actually acted on it.
Yeah, so, to also just mention the Debt Collective is a national debtors union and, really trying to bring folks together around the issue of student debt as well as other kinds of debt, right? And for a long time, the Debt Collective has been within the higher education or student loan space and really on the forefront and fighting for student loan debt cancellation. And, explicitly, I'm trying to remember the exact date or whatnot, but however long ago, the Debt Collective and others had forced the Biden administration to release a document sort of outlining. However, it was all, put behind a nice black wall of ink in his authority, which Biden does have to cancel all federally held student loan debt, which is like 92% of all the student loan debt that's out there, of like the 1.7, 1.8 trillion, right? And, time and time again over the pandemic and with the Biden administration, more recently, groups such as the Debt Collective and others had been pushing for the extension of the payment pause, but also just for this cancellation, right? President Biden, both during 2020 and then also a lot of folks just in the midterms ran on student loan debt cancellation. And that was definitely what helped in getting a lot of, I'd say the historic wins and just, youth voter turnout out to vote on such an issue, as well as so many other issues. But it was definitely interesting in, seeing again and again the Biden administration ending up being pushed by us and so many other debtors to extend that payment pause. I remember time and time again when this is going to be the last extension of the payment pause. We had our action back in April, and where it was just like, not long after that action or right around that time was when they ended up extending it again to what they were saying was now the final extension of the payment pause. And, now with a lot of the things that have been, happening in the courts, that we've sort of seen, there's been talk of another extension. So as I'll say, both with the power of cancellation, which President Biden and Education Secretary Cardona have that authority and have that power to do that, they have that similar power to extend the payment pause, which it seems like they might even do again.
Yeah, and do you have any thoughts on the authority Biden used to pass this student loan forgiveness? There's criticism that he should have used the education focused rather than the COVID focused authority. And for my part, like I am willing to believe that they would do it under like the COVID thing to kind of make it seem like a one-off thing. I find it hard to believe that they did it for that reason, in hopes that it would eventually fail after the election. But before I editorialize, do you have any thoughts on the authority that Biden used?
Well, regardless of whatever authority that it is that he uses, he shouldn't have in the first place, done this through an application. He shouldn't have done it through means testing. It should have been something that was automatic from the get-go, day one. And, regardless, we're going to have these, right-wing Trump-appointed judges like in Texas and, billionaires who are sort of backing these cases, trying to stop this. However, if Biden just would have used that authority unilaterally and just right off the bat to just wipe it all down to zero, we wouldn't even be having that sort of discussion, because it doesn't need to be the case. And he can still do so, under, the Higher Education Act of 1965. But, he has that authority. And as I'll say, like, fuck the courts. How many times have we seen, just recently with Roe or, with so many other issues, and where instead of really trying to act on these issues, so many have just sort of been like, nope, hands up. We're going to leave it through this court process. No, you have the authority to cancel all federally held student loan debt, Biden, and you need to just do it now.
And like, when you look at it, like, there's no doubt about it. I think most people, particularly people with student loans, understand that the student debt crisis is a crisis. And while I'm happy for there being like some responses, like, all of these different repayment plans have really been such a mess, from things like, forgiving people for public service. I mean, that was one of those things that when people ended up actually getting it, it came as a big surprise because most people's experiences with that system has been like an absolute disaster. There's nothing more stressful than at the end of the year having to go on the Department of Education website and picking between 15, 17 plans for which one makes the most sense for you, when what we need is cancellation. And yeah, I think the application process here, the means testing of the forgiveness, was a real nightmare. I will say, like, I was heartened in how simple the process was, but when you see the legal challenges and all of this other stuff going into it, you can see why that wasn't the best way to go about it.
Yeah, and we had Mark Joseph Stern on Majority Report earlier this afternoon. He did mention like one of the things they might do with that information is to go through and individually reach back out to people, and in a way that we can get around the courts. But again, like you said, Nick, like the lesson of this needs to be like, you need to actually go for it and stop all this stuff. And I just want to correct you on one thing before I let you come back in. You mentioned the redacted Department of Education memo, and you said it was blacked out. It was actually pinked out. And this was this memo.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
And it's just like this ridiculous song and dance of like, we need the secret information that only sort of the priests of bureaucracy can decode. And it's never been that complex.
No, it never has. And thank you for that very important correction. I definitely, I said, of course I said blacked out, and like it was a different color. And that's exactly what all the bureaucracy wants you to figure out. What was it? What was it? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter, as you're saying, Matt. And like, that is the point too, right? Like, why are we caring? And, David, you mentioned like the student like debt crisis is a crisis. Like it's not these individual circumstances of people. Like, the amount of folks that I have talked to of like, members and like debt strikers, like within the Debt Collective, like, and just hearing their stories, like these are not their own individual faults, right? And that's one of the big points with the Debt Collective of it is not your individual shame of this debt that you hold, right? One of the slogans that we say is you are not alone. You're neither the loan that you took out to, go to get a college degree, or maybe not even get a college degree. And, you're also not alone, because there are so many other people out there who have this debt and that it's holding them back. Like, I've talked to people who said of, how it's impacted their families, of how it's, prevented them from actually getting married, or like whatever issues that those are. And really the point is, creditors and like, the government right now is trying to say like, well, no, we need to deal with this on an individual basis. No, this is a crisis that needs to actually be solved, and we need to cancel student loan debt.
Yeah, and I just want like the characterization of like the folks who are benefiting from this is so aggravating too, because I just remember this conversation I had with this guy. Me and my buddy who was in town, we went and got drinks in Manhattan. At this dive bar, this other guy in there heard us talking about politics, and that's what he asked about. And he's this guy who, grocery store worker, didn't finish college, but has a mountain of debt. And he basically like, okay, I'm gonna have a drink before I get back on the subway, like fucking 45 minutes out of Manhattan. And that's what he wanted to know. Like, is Biden actually going to act on this shit that is crippling people's like opportunity?
No, just like we're on the same mind, Matt. Like, I want to ask you, Nick. I know we got like some more technical stuff to get to in a second. One thing about that the Republicans do a lot, and I even see some people on the left make this argument sometimes too, which is very frustrating, is that like this is like a desire of like the upper middle class, right? Like a bailout to those well off in society. There was I think it was in Texas, but I could be confused about that. There was a Republican like attack ad about like student debt cancellation. They had like very stereotypical like blue collar jobs, people saying like, "You're welcome, I paid for your college." And it was funny when they were listing off all the expenses that they have in their life, and they omitted one very, very clear one, which is what most working class families do, is try to save up a little bit of money so that maybe their kid could go off to college. But you mentioned a second ago, like the people who, so many people get these loans and then they don't even finish their degree, and then they hold them. I was just wondering if you could talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely is a huge number of people in which that is. I don't want to toss the wrong statistic out there because I forget off the top of my head of like what it is. I want to say, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say it's like a third of folks who, do have this debt, like might not, actually have a degree out of it. Please feel free to fact check me because I forget off the top of my head. But it just is the case for so many because of the fact that like we have this, just commercialized and this, the system of higher education where it's financialized. That's the word that I'm looking for. And where, we are, forcing folks into debt, into, paying, for even just like public higher education. Right. And it really just is such a huge issue, and where of what you were just raising, David, of how, there are those sort of like attack ads of, oh, look at the, the blue collar worker who is, like, they're not going to be for this. Right. Well, actually, if you looked, I know Astra Taylor, who's a co-founder and like co-director of the Net Collective, has also talked about this too on another podcast, in where I think CNN did like an interview or just like went around like somewhere at some I'm trying to remember where in Pennsylvania, but to basically some like big like sort of like market, and was like, hey, like, what do you guys think? And this is generally like a more rural part of Pennsylvania of where they were at. And, they really couldn't find anyone who was against this, right? Because it might not even be that they themselves, but maybe a sibling of theirs has student loan debt, or maybe their kids, right? And, one of the things is too is, do those folks not want their kids, if they're having kids, to like have this debt, right? Debt is never just an individual thing. Like, as I was saying before, it's so interconnected into families, and it's so interconnected into society writ large, whether it's student loan debt, medical debt, carceral debt, school lunch debt, even it's kind of crazy.
Yeah. I mean, the class dynamics of it. I mean, I just remember myself as a 17-year-old. Neither of my parents went to college. So we're looking at like the different financing options and me trying to, and it was naive, man. Like it's worked out for me, but it was, you do this because this is a setup for your future. And for a lot of folks, like, nah, this is not the world that, I mean, and mine was right before 2007. Right. And I just think of like, it's wild we put teenagers into that position.
Yeah. And, it didn't always used to be that way. I think, some folks know some of that history, some don't. Definitely look at some of the history of, Ronald Reagan or, others in California, basically saying that, no, we don't want some of the lower classes or some, non-white people getting this education and, understanding certain things. It's quite interesting. And, there's some great articles I could definitely recommend around that. But
yeah, John Schwartz has the article in The Intercept where he found the memo where the Reagan advisor literally worried about a, quote, educated proletariat. So it's like, putting that into terms that we can understand.
Pretty much, very explicitly, like, and and that's the thing too. These conversations definitely happen with like those memos or behind closed doors of those folks, because that's what they fear, and that they're right to fear that in their own ways, right? And we should be fighting every step of the way towards that, because that's what we need.
So, I mean, so take us to the present moment. I mean, could you break down these legal challenges that we're seeing to the debt cancellation program?
Yeah. So, as I'll mention, there's been a slew of like, right wing and like billionaire sort of like funded legal challenges, which really those folks have been just kind of throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. Whether we saw some folks, I believe it was in Wisconsin, who were, kind of scared that it seemed like it was going to be unfair because, white people were going to get less of a benefit. They're scared that we're overthrowing racial capitalism, everybody. Oh my gosh. Or we had, another, I believe it was like an attorney general who was in Arizona, if I remember correctly, who was just saying like, well, how are we going to keep people in like shitty jobs? Like, and it's just kind of just ridiculous of like, well, doesn't that showcase of like what this, student loan debt and, other forms of debt are really sort of upholding and doing, similar as the quote that you brought up of like the, educated proletariat, like that is what these people are fearing, and, we also had, one of around Mohila, which is this weird sort of like public-private sort of thing, like, like a loan servicer in Missouri, which, supposedly helps the state of Missouri in funding higher education. And that's one of the ones that's, more in the spotlight as of late, or even this one through the like right-wing and billionaire-funded Job Creators Network. Actually, one of the co-founders of that is the like co-founder of Home Depot. And, it's quite interesting. Right? What?
Is that Ken Langone?
No, the other guy, Bernie Marcus, I think.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, but, with this one, it's quite interesting. And I know Ken Klippenstein does a good job writing an article around some of the plaintiffs, right? So it focuses around Myra Brown and Alexander Taylor, who both are sort of claiming to be harmed by this cancellation. One of whom, Myra, actually got like $48,000 in PPP money canceled. Mm-hmm. So yeah, explain to me, why it's unfair, I guess, to get student loan debt canceled. Would be, and then you also have Alexander Taylor, who is currently a graduate student at Catholic University of Dallas, and is kind of upset that he's only getting $10,000 canceled compared to the $20,000 for a Pell Grant student, right? And instead of these folks, because Myra, I didn't mention, has her loans, as many other people do, as FEL loans. And those are not like qualified under the Biden, cancellation, right? But instead of either of them trying to fight to, get all of this debt canceled, it's them saying like, we can fix the harm by giving no one debt cancellation, right? And, you had this, right-wing Trump-appointed judge in the Northern District of Texas in like Fort Worth, who's really just like ignoring the law. There's a great opinion on like CNN and also in some other, I think, like legal journal that really talks in depth more on how really of what this judge is saying, kind of like if you follow it through, then it sort of like negates what he's already said. And but it's just kind of utter bullshit, as we were saying earlier, of both with that and then this thing revolving Mohila and like 6 Republican-led states, of how now the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals has issued like an injunction. But again, we didn't need to be here, and we still don't need to be here, because Biden can still just, with the flick of a pen, just cancel this debt. He doesn't need to do this, program. We don't need to have the application. We don't need to have the means testing with it. You can just compromise and settle everything down to 0. And he should do that. Secretary Cardona should do that, like right now. But of course, it's more of a conversation, as we've seen, of kicking the can down the road. And that's not what debtors want. That's not what, the debt collective want. That's not what people are really trying to get. They're not trying to see, oh, how much longer is it until I get my cancellation? It's no, I need this now. And it's not forgiveness, it's cancellation, because these people have nothing to be sorry about.
So, I mean, we can sort of, unless you think there's more to say on the administration front, like I feel like their telegraphed intent is to, like you say, kick the can down the road and pause, maybe do another pause and extend it for however long. What can an activist do? Like, let's say instead of you're upset about the getting 10 instead of 20, and you, instead of doing a right-wing lawsuit, you want to get involved. What does a debt collective have for folks?
Yeah, so definitely, check us out at debtcollective.org. You can officially join our debtors union for the less than Elon Musk price of a verified Twitter that no longer exists, or there's actually like you don't have to pay, but you can join us. Pretty awesome space and place, but as well, consider joining our debt strike. Right, we have like thousands of folks who have already said that they are going on debt strike uh, until this gets canceled, because that's what it should be. And that's what folks are clamoring for. They're not here to just let it go, right? It's not, we're going to let this play out. No, Biden, you need to use this authority, and if you're not going to use it, we are going on debt strike. So definitely, check that out. I can toss that link for you guys, of course, to share. And then also, sign. We have a petition that we're just sending off to the Biden administration, or even to, other elected officials and such, which, explicitly showcases that executive order, which we wrote for him to just flick the pen. That's all that Joe needs to do. We can say, fuck the courts, flick the pen. You can just say, come on, Joe, let's cut it out, cut the malarkey, and just flick that pen. It can be handed to him, and that he can definitely do. And lastly, I'll just mention, as I said before, you are not alone, right? And one of the big things that we like to do at the Debt Collective is have debtors assemblies. So definitely, I encourage folks to consider talking with other folks that about this issue and about just student loan debt, about other kinds of debt, right? Because it really is, when bringing folks together, that is its own sort of radical ask and radical way to just, take action, because, society so much wants to say it's your own individual fault. It's your shame for these things. But in reality, when we come together, we have power.
Can you talk a little bit more about other forms of debt? Because that's always been something that's interested me, is to try to synergize that. Because we do also the occupational debt, right? Like there's all sorts. PetSmart was literally had some sort of thing called trap loans, where they literally called them that to get associates in debt to work for them.
Yeah, I definitely think Admiral Akbar was yelling and screaming when he heard that. There are plenty of different kinds of debt in which, we're doing things on. Of course, I am not the best direct person to ask with everything. I'll highlight one thing that I was in part on, and I've actually talked on another podcast sort of about, which is school lunch debt. It's definitely another sort of crisis, and Congress had, I believe it was back right around the time of the pandemic, or a little bit after, had basically made sure that all school meals were free. However, then of course they sort of let that go. I'm trying to remember the exact deadline. Maybe it was May or June, just this past May or June. And basically, just letting it go back to sort of as we were sort of talking about before, bureaucratized, means tested, sort of tiered system of, whether or not students at public schools are getting a school meal, or whether that they'll be given told to go to the back of the line, or maybe they'll have either it could be a transcript or something withholded, or it could be the fact that they're not allowed to go to a certain club or something because they have whatever outstanding debt, right? And it's just absurd. I mean, there was a school district in PA a number of years ago, and where they basically said, oh, we're going to be we're going to be tossing or calling, we called parents or whatnot to threaten about tossing your kids to Child Protective Services because of the unpaid school meal debt, right? And it is these things that just happen and don't need to be the case. So I'm always happy to talk further, sort of about that issue, because we got not that long ago $20,000 canceled in a particular school district, just a little bit north of Philly, and still trying to sort of continue that fight onward there. But again, all of this debt is interconnected, because it's not just about student loan debt, it's not just about school lunch debt, it's not just about medical debt, carceral debt, whatever it is, because it showcases of how in society, instead of actually having sort of society writ large fund these things, we say, no, you need to take out a credit card. No, you need to sign here on the dotted line to go to a school. You know, heck, it's just ridiculous. And like, we don't need to have that. And that's, you know, very much what the fight is really for.
It's coercion with numbers, basically.
Yeah.
Nick, Marcil, thanks so much for joining us and for all the work that you guys do at the Debt Collective.
Yeah, totally. Thank you guys so much.
Appreciate it.